Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody. It's Ken Calvert, and welcome back to the Father Joe podcast. I brought up a gospel that I looked at earlier this week, and I'm going to ask you to explain it, so I'm going to be brief with it.
Sure.
It's Mark 10:17 through 27.
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. It has to do with the wealthy. We happen to be in an area right now. There's a lot of wealth in the area. We're blessed by that. However, from this gospel, if I were a priest, lightning bolts, boom, everywhere right now, I would say to people, okay, you don't have to give everything you have to the church or to the poor. Do we have a responsibility to set aside an amount of money each and every month for the Catholic Church or a specific charity, organization, or simply the poor?
A combination of all of that. I think there is a responsibility in what they call tithing. Tithing is you use 1/10 of your wealth or your income to go to various charities. Obviously, we're inundated, those of us who have gone to school, colleges, and so on. Every college is going to have a development department. They're going to be hounding us for money in one way or another. And so we have to, in a way, make a budget, writing down the colleges that we want to contribute to. Then, of course, we belong to a church. And I'm not speaking just Catholic, but whatever church we belong to, we would put that down. Then we have our favorite charities. There's always that good old Father Benedict. Oh, what a great soul he is. My poor mother had no idea who Father Benedict was, but if she missed sending Father Benedict $1 or $2 in an envelope, she would be, poor Bob. He waits for that. He says he waits for that money every month. But anyway, we each have our favorite little charities like Father Benedict. So you add all of those, and then you say, well, if I have a certain amount of money, 10% of my money should go to all of those together. I mean, not individually, but together. So you would have 10% of your income, and then you would split it up with colleges, church. I mean, if you tried to give everybody 10%, you would end up with nothing, or at least striving for 10%.
But don't do it if you can't.
No, if you can't, the Lord doesn't want you to do something you can't do. But if you can, that would be a good way of showing your sense of sensitivity to other people, right, and to other things and organizations as well. So, and it goes back to the old days when you had tithing referred to, if you had 10 sheep, one of them would have to be given to the temple, this type of thing. And this is how the temple earned its own keep, if you want. It's something that's biblically based. It's not something that somebody just made up. But it is in Scripture, and we, not just Catholics, Christians in general, and who are good at that kind of thing too, is I would say the Jews. They're very good about that because it goes back to the Jewish Scriptures as well, the tithing situation. So it's not something new or whatever, but it is something that's honorable, something we should strive for. If you can't do it, you can't do it.
Now, you referred to the fact that you spoke about this just this past week from the altar.
This particular gospel,
This particular gospel, yes.
Yes.
How did you frame it?
Well, let me put it this way. I just want to give a little background first. I think in those days, wealth was associated with goodness of life. If you were a good person, then the Lord made sure that you were taken care of financially. So people thought that way anyway. The idea that if you're living a good life, well, then you will be rewarded financially. So wealth was equal to your goodness. So this is why the disciples were shocked when Jesus told them, okay, you have to give to the poor. But I think they were shocked because they were used to the idea, well, the only reason I'm wealthy is because I'm a good person. It's not that, the two do go together. If I'm a good person, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, well, then I am a good person, and I am going to be wealthy. This is how they associated things, okay? So Jesus' statement is rather shocking.
Mm-hmm. At one point, he does say, you lack one thing.
Yes.
Go sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you will have the treasure in heaven. Then come follow me.
Correct.
It sort of suggests, look, leave what you're doing behind, give it to those that don't have anything, and then we're all good to go.
To an extent, things can be quoted out of context. We have to go back to the Ten Commandments. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the Ten Commandments, they're really laws on civil interaction. In other words, if we keep the Ten Commandments, we could get along civilly. Religion plays a very little part in the Ten Commandments. So what the Lord is saying, hey, you did a great job in keeping the Ten Commandments. But now we have to go a step further if you want a deeper spirituality, if you really want to focus on what is the Spirit and what is God, you have to go a step further. And that is, we have to divest ourselves. Now, one of the things that always is interesting to me, the nuns, the cloistered nuns in particular, who had nothing in their cells, okay, except what they needed, and that was it. Well, can one of them sin against poverty? And what I'm saying, by the way, relates to all of this. Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes. How does a nun sin against poverty?
A vow.
If she has nothing, the vow.
Yeah.
Well, the vow basically is the idea that I will have everything I need for my use, but I should not really be so interested in any material goods that it takes up my focus. So in other words, my focus should be on my prayer life, my relationship with the Lord, and so on. Because what happens is this: if you have given yourself to the Lord, the focus has to be there. If your focus is on this little trinket that somebody gave you, and it becomes like $1 million in your mind, in a way, you're sinning against poverty. I don't know if that makes any sense. Ken, would you like to comment on that? I guess what I'm trying to say is this.
Yes.
A lot of this stuff is related to attachment. Huh? Any of us can become attached to anything, just like I mentioned, a trinket.
Uh-huh.
That trinket could become so important in our lives that, it makes no sense because it's just a trinket. But meanwhile, in our minds, this has become $1 million plus. Now, if that's the case, we're losing focus of God and relationship with God. I think this is where, for example, when we entered the Christian brothers,
right,
we took the vow of poverty. And what did that mean? It was really more a vow of detachment because we had everything we needed. In those days, if I needed a pair of shoes, I would get a pair of shoes. Mm-hmm. If I needed a typewriter...
Where did that fund come from?
The common fund that the superior always held, okay?
All right, was there a ledger that said, no offense, Joe, but you've kind of tapped it already?
No, they never put it that way. So, usually people were pretty responsible in asking for whatever they needed. So, for example, if you need shoes, you're going to get shoes. If you need a typewriter, mm-hmm. In those days we had typewriters. You could get a typewriter.
Not a computer.
Yes. But in any case, you would have to ask for that. And that gave you a sense of dependence, because I can't just get my shoes. I have to ask. I'm dependent on someone else for these shoes. Now, I'm not going to be attached to these shoes. I'm going to use them because I need to use shoes. And the typewriter I'm going to use because I need to do my work as a teacher, and so on and so forth. So I guess, you speak about poverty. It's not so much poverty that religious are vowed to, but it's more the idea of detachment. You don't become attached to anything or anyone. So the same thing with celibacy. When you take the vow of celibacy, you take the vow of chastity, actually. What you're doing is that you give up any special interest in any one person. So all of these things, I think, cannot be just, we can quote out of context. Yes, it is the vow of poverty when we speak about it, but it's not poverty in the sense that we're indigent. It's poverty in the sense that we are dependent, so that if we need something, we can get it if we need it. So we would go up to the superior, brother, may I please have? And usually there was no question. I mean, everybody would ask for what they needed.
This is the gospel. The gospel suggests that we should indeed put aside some money to take care of parts of the church, the poor, the program, whatever it might be.
Sure, yes.
How many people do you think abide by it gladly versus those that kind of go, I have to?
I've never done a survey. My gut feeling it's a very small percentage that make out a budget to start with. Many people don't make out a budget, as you well know. We kind of have a mixed bag there very often. But if we do make up a budget, well then, ideally, let me say it this way, ideally, I'm going to start the budget with 10% for church, schools, organizations, and so on.
We've been through that. I'm asking you this question.
Yes.
How many people do it willingly?
Willingly to do it at all, even, as a small percentage.
See, because people grouse about their DTE bill, that would be our energy bill here. They grouse about their state taxes, their local taxes. All of this has to be set aside. I'm just wondering how many people gladly say, I have no problem putting aside 10% for the church.
Well, I'll tell you this, Ken.
I think people should feel a whole lot better about that than their taxes.
There's something called stewardship.
Yes.
And that's where that comes in. Stewardship. 1/10 of what we have, we use because we practice stewardship. So, to answer your question, very few like the idea. Now, I was once in a parish where we actually did not take up a collection on Sundays. We trusted that the people would give what was appropriate either monthly or annually, but we did not take up a collection. But then you run into the questions. Well, Christmas time, you have all of the poinsettia people that come in, they call them.
Right.
Easter time, you have, well, might as well take up a collection because we're going to miss them otherwise. So after about 2 or 3 years, we went back to the collection. But there was a time when, for a couple of years anyway, we just did not take up a collection and trusted in the good sense of the people.
The thought that I have, if I'm going to designate a portion of my money toward the church, that's where I struggled. It's like, folks, we need softer cushions for our pews. No, we don't. We can live with that. We got some poor people not too darn far from here, less than 4 miles, in a city that they're not going to have a bedspread tonight. I don't know if you like where we're going with this.
I do, because I really think people should know where their money is going.
I agree.
And I think that annually, if not more, there should be an accounting of the money that's been given. Besides that, there should be an open door policy for parishioners who are interested in reviewing where the money is going. I think it's important that there should be a policy of, what's the word I'm looking for, openness.
Well, at the end of the day, it is our responsibility. And again, we are talking about the Gospel of Mark this past week. The church and the money that it requires should be considered a gift, an obligation, and something we like to do.
Yes. common sense has to be used.
And I think it's their moral Christian responsibility to realize that, to understand that, and find a space in their heart, in their head,
and
in their soul,
pocketbook.
and in their pocketbook to say, you know, damn it, I got it pretty darn good. And I'm willing to bet you that if we had 10 people in here right now, we would have 8 different people, aside from you and I, who would have their own opinion about what we just discussed. Yeah. Let's think about doing that in the future.
I would love to.
Let's do it at your place.
Anytime.
Thanks, everybody. It's the Father Joe Podcast, and we'll see you next time right here on the Father Joe Podcast. And now you say,
I look forward to it. Thank you. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.
If you have a question or a comment for the Father Joe Podcast, send it to fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. Follow Father Joe on Twitter @FatherJoePodcast. The Twitter address again is @FatherJoePodcast. Please subscribe to the Father Joe Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and soon on iHeartRadio. We also ask that you rate the podcast and feel free to leave a comment. And finally, if you have a friend that you think might enjoy the podcast, please pass it along. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and see you next time.